Well, let me welcome you to the Alpha course. My name is Keith Collins, and how was dinner tonight? Was it good? All right. Listen, I know that this is the first night, so there's lots of curiosity, but the one thing that we can guarantee you is that you will eat well every week that you come, and you don't have to do dishes, you didn't have to prepare anything, so we know you'll enjoy the food if nothing else. But tonight is an introductory night to just try and give you some idea about what the Alpha course is about, and do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to continue in that? Do you want to bring anybody back with you? And so we'll give you a little bit of a slice as to what it feels like to be a part of a night at the Alpha course. But somehow you got invited to this deal. There was either a friend or a family member, or maybe just got something hung on your door and you said, hey, I'll come check that thing out. Somebody told you it's 10 weeks and it's about God and religion, what you believe. Just come, right? And so you really kind of don't exactly know what you're getting yourself into, do you? So we realized tonight we're going to ask you at the end of the course, do you want to sign up for the rest of the 9 weeks? And you can welcome to bring somebody back with you. Just let us know and you'll write something down. But we have found through the years that, some people got to work through some uncomfortableness or some fears even to be a part of the Alpha course. So we've kind of, in honor of the former David Letterman, who used to be on Late Night, we have put together a bit of a top 10 list. Let's see. Top 10 questions or concerns about signing up for Alpha. Number 10, 10 weeks, really? I just don't know if I can do anything for 10 weeks. Number 9, 10 weeks, really? It really is 10 weeks long? All right, number 8, afraid of being asked to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I mean, it's church, it's a spiritual thing. And strangely enough, number 7, afraid of being asked to hold hands and even spell Kumbaya, which I'm pretty sure you didn't know how to spell it until just now, right? Let's see. Number 6, concern, afraid you might miss a rare story about Donald Trump. I know that's kind of almost never in the news these days, is it? Number 5, 10 weeks? For real? I don't know. Number 4, concern Kool-Aid may be a beverage choice at some point. Now, the only people who are laughing, you just gave away your age, because like everybody below 40 is going, 1, what is Kool-Aid and what's wrong with it? Never heard of Guyana or any of that stuff, all right? So, number 3, fear of handling snakes. I mean, it's a religious event. We're in the South. Who knows? Number 2, concern that Alpha is the sister company of Amway. You actually don't find that out until like week 9, so... Number 1, 10 weeks for real? Yeah, well, it is 10 weeks. Well, here's what we want to do tonight. I want to give you a feel for what the course is like. It's rather interesting that this is a course that was developed by a man named Nicky Gumbel. He started off, he was a lawyer in London, England, went to school at Cambridge, and then he went back to school to get a theology degree at Oxford, went on to be a pastor. So he went from being a lawyer to being a pastor. And he wrote a book called The Questions of Life, and he turned it into a discussion format where folks could come together and they could talk about all kinds of questions that they had about what they believed and what other people believed, and just thinking through those kinds of questions. So we put together a little bit of a video of folks who have been through the course with us before. I don't know, how many times have we been doing this now? 29 times? So we've done 29 times. So if you count the heads in here, multiply that by 29, that's about how many folks have just spent the evening with us doing this. But around the world, some 20 million plus people have been through the Alpha course in all kinds of languages and all kinds of locations. So it definitely is striking a nerve with folks and touching some questions that I think all of us have. But take just a moment here and watch this video, and it'll give you a feel for kind of what the night feels like.
Hi, I'm Keith Collins. I'm the senior pastor of Lakeview Christian Center, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the Alpha course.
It's really a unique course. It's been held in churches, universities, prisons, coffee shops. Over 27 million people have done Alpha in 169 countries and 112 languages. Here at Lakeview, we've been doing the Alpha course since 2001, and we've seen thousands of people attend our course over those years.
One of the things that we've discovered is that the Bible actually provides real answers to some of the most difficult questions that we as people are facing.
The question that I needed answered most, that had been with me for decades, was why am I here?
You believe what you believe, I believe what I believe, but who determines who's right or wrong? And I just knew that somebody was wrong. They all couldn't be right. Somebody had to be wrong, so I just assumed they were all wrong.
I was just looking for something, I tried what the world offered me. I went through the program. I tried to be sober there. I tried to find my own sense of spirituality, and it wasn't working for me.
Was there a God? Is the Bible real? Who is Jesus? Why should I read the Bible? Why should I go to church? I had many questions.
In our 90-mile-an-hour paced life, sometimes one of the most valuable things we can do is just pause and stop and ask good questions like, what do I believe? And why do I believe it? And what really is the meaning of life? The Alpha Course is a place where you can ask those kind of questions in a non-threatening environment and listen to other people think through those things as well. But it's not just about asking questions. It's also about relationships and friendships that get formed. People who come together and share life and have a time to share about their own experiences together in a non-threatening, non-pressured environment.
I decided to come to the Alpha Course mainly out of curiosity. I said, let me go see what this is about. If I don't like it, I'm out of there. I'm sitting close to the door. One thing that I experienced when I first walked through the doors was the friendliness and the acceptance of those around me, like they had known me my whole life.
The world's pretty rude, so you show up at Alpha expecting maybe people to be that way, but it's just they're not.
It was friendly. It was fun. It wasn't just dinner at a church environment. It wasn't somber or sober or stiff. There's a lot of people there too. So I didn't feel so centered on. I didn't feel alone.
When I first came to Alpha, I was really afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. Everyone there was very, very, very nice, and they welcomed us. We felt very welcomed immediately. So the fear vanished, although I was wondering what we're going to do for those 10 weeks.
On a typical evening in Alpha, we'll come together, we'll have a great meal, then we'll have a brief teaching, and then afterwards there'll be a time of discussion where people can just share their own thoughts about the topic that was presented that night, and you can listen and interact with others as they think through some of the questions of life that are being discussed.
Alpha is that's a place where you can think. It's a place where you can challenge your thoughts. You can challenge other people's thoughts. And it was accepted and encouraged.
It really got your thought process going, got you thinking about why you do the things that you do in your life. And what are you basing that information on, and why do you believe what you believe?
We were learning, but at the same time, it was fun. We laughed a lot, we joked a lot, and we were serious a lot.
You go, you listen, and you talk about it. It's a place that's warm and welcoming, and you could have your questions answered and not be afraid of the answer. It's not threatening. You could leave if you want to, but if you stay, you could learn so much.
This was a place that I could think. This is a place where I could discuss and have intellectual conversations. I didn't have to leave my brain at the door.
Whether you're asking questions about life or about Christianity, or maybe just curious about what the Bible really says, why not invest 10 weeks in a course that's designed to probe those very issues?
Well, everyone needs compassion, a love that's never failing. But let mercy fall on me. Well, everyone needs...
Come check it out. If you don't like it, you don't have to come back. But if your experience is like so many others, we believe you will enjoy it, and you'll form friendships that will last a lifetime.
It has totally changed my life, my relationship with my husband, my children, most of all the Lord. I definitely think that no matter what the issue is, the Alpha Course has the answer to.
I think you should come to Alpha because it'll change your life. It changed ours, and we've invited some friends to come because we thought it might help them too.
This was a true learning experience for me.
I want to invite you to Come and join us.
Well, I think you guys can track with me when I say, boy, aren't we just living very, very busy lives? And one of the things that busyness does, it creates an ability to drown out questions that exist on the inside of us. And the reality is, I think we're all asking questions. I know I'm not alone in that. We've all got questions. In this room tonight are a bunch of people, like our human containers, full of questions. But will we slow up and let those questions out? Let them make us uncomfortable, make us find answers, make us examine things that we're doing. And here's an interesting thought from a fellow named Os Guinness. He writes, most of us feel immortal in our teens and 20s, then move through life so fast in our 30s and 40s that we lose sight of the journey and think only of our careers. Even in our 50s, we barely hear the roar of the rapids several bends downriver. Have you awakened to the journey of life, or are you among those drifting down the years? Are you among those so caught up on the project of themselves, they choose not to hear the flow of time? Are you living an examined life? Or are you living in the hand-me-down ideas of others? Are you open to the full interrogation of life? Or are you closed to the search because you believe what you've always believed without question? Or that's a little bit of a scary place to actually be, because I know some of us want to figure out some things, and once we check off a box or answer a question, even if we've never really thought it through very well, even if we just inherited an answer from our parents or grandparents or people around us, but why do we really believe the things that we believe? Right? You know, the Socrates, the great philosopher, said the unexamined life is not really worth living. Right? So it's worth it to take some time to ask questions. And listen, no matter where you are tonight, I know we've all got questions. Whether you're young or older, you've lived a lot of life, you're just starting out, or you're rich, wealthy, or just trying to figure out how to get to the end of this month, right? We've all got some questions. I recognize this fellow, Shia LaBeouf, pretty successful actor in the acting world. He says, sometimes I feel I'm living a meaningless life, and I get frightened. I know I'm one of the luckiest dudes in America right now. I have a great house. My parents don't have to work. I've got money. I'm famous. But it could all change, man. It could go away. You never know. I don't handle fame well. Most actors on most days don't think they're worthy. I have no idea where this insecurity comes from, but it's a God-sized hole. If I knew, I'd fill it, and I'd be on my way. Well, if you're a sports enthusiast or just like to deflate balls, you know who this guy is, Tom Brady. He had an interview with Steve Kroft on 60 Minutes. He said, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be all it's cracked up to be. Steve Kroft followed up with another question. He said, well, what's the answer? And Brady's response was, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I love playing football. I love being quarterback for this team. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of other parts about me that I'm trying to find. And so success doesn't seem to answer all the questions that we have. Right? Some of you might recognize Ted Turner from back in the day, cable TV pioneer. During an interview with Barbara Walters, he was asked, what do you mean by success? What to you is successful? He replied, I think it's kind of an empty bag, to tell the truth. You have to get there to really know that. Money doesn't buy happiness, and neither does honors or position and awards or trophies. And see, one of the greatest, most deceptive thing about living life is all of us feel like we just haven't got enough money yet. We just haven't been successful enough yet. We just haven't arrived yet. Because if we could just be where Ted Turner is in whatever field we've always dreamed of living in, then, or would we? Or will we have Ted's answer and say, Still not feeling it. Or Tom Brady's answer, still not feeling it. This is a pretty successful actor, Jim Carrey. He says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. This is a cartoon that was done by Ralph Barton. Ralph Barton was probably one of the most world-renowned cartoonists in the early 1900s. And he actually wrote this on his suicide note. He says, I've had few difficulties, many friends, great successes. I've gone from wife to wife and from house to house, visited great countries of the world, but I'm fed up with inventing devices to fill up 24 hours a day. And it's interesting, you look at that caricature that he did there, that's a cartoon that he had done of Ernest Hemingway. And interesting in the question of, how do you find a meaningful life, contribute and live a life in such a way that you feel like my life matters, I've arrived at something that really, really matters. Well, Ernest Hemingway, I mean, if you're a literary student or you love literature, this guy was a giant in the literary world. Well, listen to his resume. Silver Medal of Military Valor in World War I. Pulitzer Prize in 1953, Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. In 2001, 2 of his books would be named to the list of the 100 best English language novels of the 20th century. This man accomplished some things in the field that he had a passion for. But Ernest Hemingway also committed suicide in 1961. So in spite of all these accomplishments, something can still be lacking, or some questions that are going off on the inside of us can still feel like I don't have the answers for them, right? So what kind of questions are you bringing into this meeting tonight? What's the meaning of life? I think at some point, young or old, life brings you to a point where you really do start to ask that question. How do we deal with guilt? A room full of people, a lot of stories here. Right, so if you just thought for a moment, all of us have people and situations in our rearview mirror as we've moved on, but there are situations that I bet we wish we could go back and redo. I bet we wish we hadn't said that or done that or taken the easy way or hurt that person in a way that just has never been able to be repaired. And here you are living now in the shadow of those events. And how do you move on? How do you deal with life with this guilt from our background? Right? That's just a reality. I know there's many of us would have stories like that where we've experienced that. How do we make sense of human suffering? And we've got all kinds of events personally that we've experienced. There's all kinds of events in the news. We've watching our neighbors up to the northwest of us in Baton Rouge deal through situations that many of us found ourselves in 11 years ago. And you just see these events and such loss in people's lives. And how do we make sense of all that? What's the cause of evil in the world? You just watch the news every night. How do I pray? Right? How do you read the Bible? How do you pray? How do you relate to God? Right? We've got questions. And I guess the question for our questions is, will we take a moment and ask them and really think about them and really ponder them in our own lives? And that's what we hope that the Alpha Course would do for you. Let me just tell you my background a little bit. It's not a super interesting background. I'm a pretty boring individual, actually. I've been a pastor here in this church for over 23 years now. Before that, I worked in downtown New Orleans. I was an executive recruiter. I've grown up here locally. I went to LSU and graduated from UNO as a mechanical engineer. From this area, I've been married for 25 years. I have 7 children. I think some of them are here in the room somewhere. Yeah, you didn't have to own up to that. That's okay, baby. Thanks. Grew up, I'm a local guy. Grew up here in the New Orleans area. Grew up in River Ridge. Any River Ridgers here? One. Just one, really? All right. Got 2 River Ridgers. All right, back when I was growing up in River Ridge, it was known as Reefer Ridge. Yeah. See, again, the young people aren't getting any of this humor, but you old people, have some reefer in your background, don't you? The whole issue and subject of religion, growing up for me, I'm your typical kid growing up in the suburbs of New Orleans. So I was raised Catholic, went to a little private school, did high school religion classes growing up. So, there was a category of religion in my life, but religion would not have been something that I would have been super comfortable talking about. I didn't run towards discussions in religion. And I can remember there would be moments, my mom and dad were actually quite a bit older than I was, and so they had this properness about them that they wanted you to behave right in public. So there were just certain things you didn't talk about back in the day. When you're in public, you don't talk about religion, sex, and politics. And now, if that were true, there'd be nothing on TV, right? But this is the one thing about the Alpha Course is when you walk in here, you know that this subject of religion isn't going to creep up on you and surprise you. It's like, all of a sudden, I'm just having a conversation with this guy about nothing, and next thing you know, he's telling me about hell, and I'm going to burn in it, and what just happened here? All right, well, you walk in here, and we're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about God. We're going to talk about what people believe. And there's going to be a variety of opinions seated at the table, and people are going to be able to share their background, their experience, and say where they agree with something that was talked about that night, or say where they disagree about something that was talked about that night. And that's what the course is designed to do. It's really designed to get us to think about the issues in our lives and what we believe and why do we believe it. Now, there's no quiz involved. You don't have to study in advance to come. You're not going to be put on the spot to give some kind of report. If you don't want to share anything at the table, you don't have to do that. But I tell you, you get the most out of the course if you'll engage the questions and think out loud with other people that are at your table. And that's really what it's designed to do. My experience, right, at some point you're going to get a cool little manual like this. If that doesn't bring you back, I don't know what will. But I think tonight, you guys have little handouts on your table there? You do, I think. They're much bigger than this. This is for the old people in the room who can't read. All right, so if you open up to, well, you don't have to open up because you just have the cheap version. But if you come back next week, full color next week, all right? Session 1, this is the question for this evening, is there more to life than this, right? And so Christianity and the person of Jesus Christ that we're going to talk about tonight, it seeks to interact with that question. How you're providing answers for life. And is there more to life than what we see going on, right? And so you see there in your first little section on what would look like page 8 for you. What, if any, has been your experience of Christianity? And he offers 3 choices in his little book. He says, boring, untrue, and irrelevant. Well, let me just think through those with you for a moment. Because, I can really relate to some more than others. When I was growing up and doing something in the religious world, I did very much feel like religion was boring. I mean, it was something you just tried to survive. Right? I spent my time trying to figure out who's got the shortest service. I will drive all the way across town to find the priest who will go the fastest through this thing and get me out of there the quickest. Because it just felt like it just didn't have to do with life. And people who are in a setting where that's how it feels, well, they don't tend to look like this guy, He's got a big G on his van. What if this guy was parked in your church parking lot when you got there? Right? He's been there early. He's got brats and stuff going on a barbecue grill, and people are about to come to church, and he's like, "Woo! Today, baby, today." Us and God, man. Us and God. Yeah, you're right. High-fiving, and he's cooking up stuff, and he's going to go inside. I never met anybody like this in a church parking lot coming in. It just seemed as though this God thing inside, it's quiet, hushy, and no one really wants to talk about it anyway. Keep it to yourself. Right, well, that was my experience. But, for the first time in my life, I picked up a Bible and I started to read it. I never really read the Bible. I'd been to church a lot, but I never really read the Bible. And the people in the Bible, they had real stories about people who had encountered God in a way that left a deep impact on their life. They were anything but boring. These were people who were willing to take risks in their life. They were willing to become a part of an ostracized group. They were willing to follow Jesus Christ at great personal cost. They didn't mind losing businesses and money. Something about what they encountered in God was so meaningful to them that they could shift their whole life into a new direction. And I thought, okay, that's different. And then I met some people who had had an encounter like that themselves. It wasn't just these people in the Bible. They were people living today that I had met who were excited about relating to God and knowing God. And it was like this living relationship was taking place for them with God. They talked about God like it was personal. When they pray, it was like they're having real conversations with God. They could talk about things out of the Bible like it made sense and it was a reality for them. And that was strange for me. But when you find the God of the Bible, he's anything but boring. And relating to him, obviously, is anything but boring. While our author says, maybe not boring to you, how about just untrue? Is Christianity just untrue? I mean, this is just, well, if you examined the Christian religion, which is kind of what we're going to do, we'll put it on trial a little bit and examine, is this a trustworthy thing? Where does it come from? Are these just crazy ideas passed along by crazy people? Well, one of the things you're going to find, I think, as I've looked at this for years and interacted with folks for years, is I don't think you find Christianity to be untrue as much as you find it to be hard to believe. It may not be the easiest thing to believe. And it does involve faith, and you'll hear more about that in the weeks to come. But you know, it can be a little bit of a challenge to believe it. You know, for one reason, in our day, we're very scientifically driven. We have a great deal of respect for the medical community and technology and science and all its advances. And then along comes the Bible telling these stories about things that happen that defy all kinds of laws that are in our universe. And there's this supernatural element that's in the Bible, right? You read stories about this man named Jesus Christ who reached out to dead people and raised them from the dead. Life came back into this person who had been dead for days. All right, well, we got no medical explanation. We got no technology explanation for that. It's just an interruption of our natural world. So it is a supernatural thing. And that's not too challenging for us to believe, but it is in some ways, because it makes our lives and the answers that we might have to get challenged. But quite honestly, as I interact with folks through the years, it's not so much the supernatural element that really trips folks up. I think this is what trips up many of us. It makes it hard to believe. It's that there's a sense of cost involved in believing that there's a personal God out there who owns the planet that you and I live on. Now, if there isn't, right, I feel differently about how I'm living my life, how I'm not living my life, the things I get around to, the things I don't get around to, the way I treat people, the way I don't treat people. But if there's a personal God out there, that personal God might have an opinion about things. And at some point, maybe everybody has to give an account to this God about our lives. And maybe he's got a different opinion about this thing that I'm doing in my life right now than the one I have. I want to do it this way, but what if he wants to do it that way? And I think all of us live with that in the back of our heads, with this sense that I think I'd rather just say, I don't even know if that's true. But part of me doesn't really believe what I just said, but I don't want to get too close to it either, because it might mess with my world. But that's one of the things you're going to discover as you study through and look through some of what the Bible has to say, is you don't find people in the Bible who look like somebody put a gun to their head and forced them to live a life that they really, really, really don't want to live. Somehow it's peer pressure, God pressure kind of thing happening. That's not what you find in the Bible. You find people in the Bible who are delighted to be around God, to know God, and pursue him. There's something rewarding and fulfilling about a relationship with God. That's what you find in Scripture. So yeah, it can feel like it's a little difficult to believe. I don't think untrue. How about irrelevant? Is Christianity really relevant to our lives? I mean, look at our way we live our lives. Look at the needs that we have as a culture, as a society. You got to get to the end of the month. You got to pay some bills. You've got kids to raise. You're trying to worry about how to retire. What does this Christianity have to do with life? Is it even relevant? Well, when those questions come to life, answers become relevant, don't they? Right, if you're not asking any questions, then probably anything that could be said to you in the category of religion is irrelevant. But at some point, you're going to start asking questions. Because at some point, life goes off the tracks. At some point, you can't seem to meet a need. You got lots of money, but you don't have lots of health. You don't have a lot of time left. The people in your life won't cooperate. I mean, this is a fact of life. And it's going to create issues that are very relevant to our lives. I remember one of the most popular books ever written came out at just the perfect time. It was by a man named Dr. Spock. Not Mr. Spock, don't get confused here. Dr. Spock. How many of y'all know who Dr. Spock is? All right. For all the gray hairs, that's who answers these questions. I need to get relevant to the young people, don't I? Dr. Spock was a pediatrician who wrote a book on raising children in 1946. Right, so right at the beginning of the baby boomer generation. So biggest generation up until recently of all time in this country. And this guy, what a brain he was, writes a book about how to raise children when people are about to have kids all over the place. And they bought his book like mad. See, because you know what makes you really, really interested in how to raise children? Having one. If you don't have one, it's like lawnmower mechanics. Who cares? Until your lawnmower breaks, and then all of a sudden that matters, right? Well, have children, and you're interested. Well, have your life to serve up to you issues that you don't have answers for, but you need them. And suddenly, if there's a God out there, he becomes relevant to how do we live our life. Well, this Jesus Christ, he made these huge, huge claims about who he was and what he can mean to us. Claims that are unique, claims that no one else has made. And so to examine him is really the thrust of the Alpha Course, to examine the claims and the person and what Jesus Christ stood for, what he taught, but to see is he qualified to speak to us about these issues. And that's where the course will go. And you'll have honest opportunities to say, hey, yeah, I think that's a great point, but what about this? And can you really trust what he said here? Or so you'll have an opportunity to honestly discuss those things. But let me just examine something that Jesus said. In John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. All right, so typically in an Alpha night, we just want to take some thoughts and just take them apart and think out loud together about them. So you have Jesus Christ making this giant statement that he is the way. All right, so let's examine that for a second. You have in your little outline there, direction for a lost world. Jesus claims to be the way. If there's a way through this life, he claims to be it. He makes a giant claim for all the different people that are in this room tonight. Jesus Christ makes one claim to every person. He says, I'm the way through life, right? I'm the person to bring answers to your questions and to deal with things that are inside of your life. And this is how he spoke to us. This is an interesting thing about Jesus understanding the inner condition of humanity. Right? He says things like this in John chapter 6, verse 35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Right? It's interesting, Jesus picked up on something that every one of us can identify with. Every one of us knows what it is to be hungry and to be thirsty. It's that inner dimension to us, this alarm that goes off on the inside of us that lets us know that we're not okay. I'm not okay. I'm hungry. I need something from out there. I'm not complete. I'm not self-sufficient. I need something out there to come satisfy something in here. And he used an illustration here, right? He wasn't trying to, give us the impression that he's actually a loaf of bread, a po' boy. He's trying to use an illustration that you and I know what it's like to have this inner desire, this inner craving for our lives, to be hungry for something or thirsty, that sense of almost desperation, that life needs to make sense for me. And Jesus says, well, I am the bread of life. And he who comes to me and he who believes in me will have his thirst satisfied, right? He made this statement in the same Gospel of John. He says, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing to say to people who do have a heartbeat. They do have a pulse. They are alive. But Jesus could look at people who were alive and could say, no, I came that you might have a life that you don't have. Even though you are alive on the outside, there is a sense of life that you are missing on the inside. And so one of the questions that every one of us is very busy answering is, what are we looking to in our lives to satisfy the inner longings that are inside of our heart? What do we seek out in order to make us happy? Right, that's what we're after, right? Well, here's an interesting little video I'll let you watch from a guy named John Stossel. Always appreciated some of his work. The Pursuit of Happiness, a little study he did a number of years ago. Let's watch this for a second. We'll come back and have a couple more thoughts.
Everyone wants to feel good. And while many of these things do make people feel good, if not great, they don't last, say the researchers. Disappointment awaits those of us who pursue happiness through hedonism. Drugs, sex, shopping, food even. They don't provide lasting happiness. Fame doesn't work either. I grew up convinced that true happiness was being a sports hero. What could be better than the joy of success? The applause. But the Super Bowl winning quarterback asks, is that all there is? Probably the biggest myth is that money's the answer. 25 years ago, when college students were asked, what's important? Most said family, or developing a meaningful life philosophy. But today, most students say, being very well off financially.
You just won $10 million.
Well, if that's true, then people who win a lot of money should be happy. But are they? Meet some lottery winners. Teresa Brunning of Colorado won $1 million. Janetta Williams won $5 million in the Arizona lottery. Curtis Sharp collected $5 million in New York.
For a time, I seemed like I was in a dream world, you know?
Did you come down to earth?
Oh, yes, I came down, you know. I came down to earth. I got divorced from my first wife and married my second wife, and I spent a lot of money on the wedding, you know. It's
$100,000 on
yes, that didn't last 5 years, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe he didn't win enough. Sherry Gagliardi and her husband won $26 million.
I was numb for 3 years.
But you must have been happy.
Yes and no. I got a divorce and 2 years after we had won.
Studies of lottery winners have found that within a year, most say they are no happier than they were before they won.
Money wouldn't buy you happiness?
No, of course not. You can buy a therapist, you know, a marriage counselor. People have a misconception about having money. You go out and you go, oh, that's what I want, I'll buy it. And a couple of weeks later, it's like, that emptiness comes back. Then what?
I mean, how many suits can I wear? How many hats can I wear? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, come on. I noticed that none of these winners is offering to give the money back. It's nice to be able to buy things.
Good afternoon. Would you like to try Eternity for Ladies?
Life, liberty, and the purchase of happiness has become the new American dream.
Psychologist David Myers, who spent 6 years examining hundreds of studies on happiness for this book, says once you get past poverty, money doesn't help, no matter how much stuff you buy.
The stockpiles of CDs, the closets full of clothes, the big screen stereo TV systems doesn't do it. Clearly it doesn't do it. People having achieved that level of wealth have now adapted to it, and it takes new increments, a faster computer, a bigger TV screen or whatever, to rejuice the joy that the initial purchase gained for them.
To rejuice the joy. You see it in babies. Give a 3-month-old a mobile with 2 objects and most like it. But researcher Jeffrey Fagan of St. John's University says if kids are given a 10-object mobile and then you try to get them to go back to the 2-object one, they lose interest or cry.
We get used to having more and it doesn't work anymore.
That's right.
And that's why today, with double the incomes and double what money buys for us, we're no happier than we were 40 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can argue with that. I just don't know if we stop and ask or observe in our own lives how whatever it was that we set out to achieve, once we've got it, we just lift our eyes to the next thing. Right? I just don't know too many people who say, I just love this car. It's the last car I'll ever own. Oh, I love this house. It's the last house. It's like, oh, I love my new iPhone. You really don't, do you? I mean, just something that in us that says, nope, still need something else out there. Nope, still need something else out there. Well, where does that come from? What's interesting, Ray Pritchard wrote a book called An Anchor for the Soul, and he says, we were made to know God. We are incurably religious by nature. That's why every human society, no matter how primitive, has some concept of a higher power, some vision of reality that goes beyond the natural. And listen, I don't want to chase this thought for just for a second. I know scientifically we start feeling, well, why does humanity have this concept of a God? I don't know. You can't, put a headset on an ant pile and check out what the ants are thinking. But I seriously doubt the ants are watching you walk by going, oh, God. Look at the God. Oh, another one. They're ants, right? I mean, they're not... Well, if we're just evolved creatures, why does humanity all over the place have this inner sense that there's a God out there? There's a higher power out there. We somehow are related to this being. And it's almost as though it's written into the inside of us. And every one of us has their moments when we feel like we've got to make contact with that. We've got to be affected by that. St. Augustine prayed this prayer. He says, you made us for yourself, speaking to God. And he says, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Well, Jesus claims that he deals with that. He says, I'm the way. I'm the way through this life to lead you to the destination and to answer the issues of your life that long for satisfaction and fulfillment and peace on the inside. He makes a big claim. And we're going to test those claims and see if that's worth trusting him in that category. Well, he also says this. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth. Well, that's an interesting thing to say. The truth, not a truth, not just something, a bunch of options that are out there. Jesus is like one of the questions that's the right answer. No, he comes along and he makes a big, giant statement. He is the truth. And how relevant is that to us in our lives? And this is one of the things that's sometimes, again, we just don't take a moment to think through. Is it okay for us? Got a lot of people in the room. We've come from all kinds of different backgrounds. How do we deal with the idea that there's lots of different beliefs among us in this category? Do we just reserve ourselves to the thought that, well, everybody just believes what everybody believes? That's just kind of up to them. As though that makes every option a right option? Is there any options out there that might not be a right option for us to consider? Does it matter what we believe? Or is it just okay to believe anything? It's religion. You kind of believe whatever you want. Isn't it enough if people are sincere? Right? If people really, truly believe something. All right, well, is it really enough if people are sincere? Can people be sincere and perhaps be sincerely believing something that's not true? Jesus claims to be the truth. Right, so I remember, in the world of religion, there's all kinds of examples like this, but a number of years ago, there was a small group of folks living in Northern California, led by a man named Marshall Applegate, and he believed that trailing the Hale-Bopp comet that was about to pass through our part of the solar system, trailing that comet was a little spaceship that somehow the alien beings on board that spaceship would take people from this planet and whisk them away from all the trouble in this world. And when the comet passed by, all they needed to do was commit suicide as that occurred, and they would be taken away from all the suffering and difficulty here. And several of them committed suicide when the Hale-Bopp comet passed through our part of the solar system. They were sincere. You wouldn't have done that. So the question wasn't sincerity, but does the sincerity make a spaceship appear in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet? Right? None of us probably in this room believe, well, sincerity doesn't create spaceships. No, we don't really believe that. But they sincerely believed that. Right? Muhammad Atta was one of the suicide bombers who flew a plane into the World Trade Center. He wrote this note to the others who were with him. He said, you should pray, you should fast, you should ask God for guidance, you should ask God for help. Continue to pray throughout this night, continue to recite the Quran. You will be entering paradise. You'll be entering the happiest life, everlasting life. I don't think it's a question of sincerity, but does sincerity make these things come true? Did those who committed these acts actually enter into some condition of paradise? And was this really what God wanted for them to take innocent lives? See, there's lots of beliefs out there, and quite honestly, we don't really believe all of them. But at the end of the day, we're going to believe something. So we might want to think through the things that we believe, right? Does it matter what we believe? Well, some things can't all be true at the same time. Right? So there's lots of beliefs out there. When we look at one sitting next to the other, we might have to conclude, well, this one can't be true if this one over here is true. Right? Here's what Islam teaches. In the Quran, in Surah 5, it says, they are unbelievers who say God is the Messiah. Now, speaking about Christianity, because Christianity claims that Jesus Christ was God who had come as the Messiah. Mary's son. The Messiah, son of Mary, was only a messenger, right? Nothing more than that in the eyes of the Quran. Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, was no more than a messenger of Allah. Say not Trinity, desist. It will be better for you. For Allah is one God, glory to Him, far exalted is He above having a son. So Islam stands and looks over at Christianity and says, not true. Right? So if this one's true, then that one's not true. Right, so this is the war between religious beliefs. Sometimes we stand and we say, hey, if you want to believe in Islam, we'll believe in Islam. If you want to believe in Christianity, we'll believe in Christianity. But we don't realize that these religions are all shooting at each other. Right? They don't get along. And they tell each other, I don't believe you and you're wrong. And that's what Islam does with Christianity. Mormons, in the Journal of Discourses, it says, in the beginning, the head of the gods, plural, called a council of the gods, and they came together and concocted a plan to create the world and people. Or we just learned from Islam that God is one, but now we're learning from the Mormon belief that there are a council of gods out there who had come together to create a plan for the existence of this planet and the people that are on it. Well, is there one God or are there many gods? Well, those, you choose one, but you can't choose both. They go on and say, remember that God, our Heavenly Father, was perhaps once a child, mortal, like we ourselves. And He rose step by step in the scale of progress until He has arrived at the point where He now is. So Mormonism teaches that there was a point in time where the God who we call God was once a mortal being like you and me, and He just progressed to such a place that He sort of graduated into a higher existence, and He became God over these people and joined the other gods who exist in the universe somehow. Now, but that doesn't get along with Christianity or Islam or Judaism, because Christianity teaches the exact opposite, that God was never a man until the eternal God became a man, and that was for the purpose of Jesus Christ being the man who could reconcile humanity to God Himself. So there is a variety of beliefs out in the religious world, and sometimes we just don't even bother to examine them at all, but they can't all be true. Right? Among the beliefs, Buddhism doesn't believe in a personal God. Buddhism believes in transcending this natural existence with a different form of thinking, a different mindset. So transcendental meditation is an attempt to get us to a higher plane in the way in which we think. But it's not trying to connect you with a personal God the way Islam is, or especially the way Christianity and Judaism is. So there is this variety among these beliefs, but you have Jesus Christ who stands in the midst of all those ideas and makes this claim: I am the way and I am the truth. And if there is a way and a truth that can be discovered by us, then that probably is a pretty important thing to each of us. And he makes one last claim we'll talk about tonight. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. He makes a claim to be the life. And as I said earlier, that's a strange thing to say to people who aren't in a coffin. This wasn't preached in a graveyard. This was preached to people whose hearts were beating and who had blood flowing in their veins. But there was something he was saying about the quality and the life that we now have. He says, I'm the life that you're missing. And here's the story of the Bible from its beginning. It's major point in the very beginning. You have God who creates man. Out of nothing, God creates, and then he creates man out of what he's made. And the Bible says that God breathed life into man. So man was a shell of an existence, and God breathed his life into man, and man came alive. And God set man in this perfect place, this place called Eden, where everything was 24/7 buffet line of enjoyment. Everything that was there was to be enjoyed. God created pleasures for man, for his eyes to enjoy, for his taste buds, relationally. Everything about what God made was beautiful, good, and completely enjoyable. There was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no disappointment. And the one thing God said is, there is a tree that contains the knowledge of good and evil in this garden. You may enjoy and be involved with everything else I've created, but you may not eat of that tree. You can't handle the knowledge that's in that tree. Well, man got a little bit too curious, and man was a little bit too tempted, and rather than just trust the God who had made him and enjoy the things that God had given him, he decided he wanted to have whatever that tree would bring to him. And so he eats from the tree. And the Bible says that when he ate of the tree, he died. And when you read the scripture story, it's about Adam and Eve. And they actually didn't fall to the ground and die, but they died in a different way. They died on the inside. They kept living physically for quite a long time. But in the moment that they ate of that tree, they lost the life that God had put inside of them. So every human being that was ever born from Adam and Eve from that moment on was born into a condition where on the inside they were dead. They were alive on the outside, but they were dead on the inside. So that when Jesus comes and stands before them and says, I came that they might have life, what he was talking about was that life, that thing on the inside, that thing inside of you that's hungry and thirsty, that neediness that nothing seems to be able to satisfy, that hole that was being described by all these folks. Jesus says, I am the life. And so that's a giant claim, and he claims that he's the only one who can fix this thing that's gone wrong on the inside of us, right? Remember our actor friend, Mr. LaBeouf, he says, I don't handle fame well. Most actors on most days don't. They think they're not worthy. Have no idea where this insecurity, this inner turmoil, this emptiness comes from, but it's a God-sized hole. If I knew, I'd fill it, and I'd be on my way. And he's not the first person to refer to that as a God-sized hole. In the 17th century, Blaise Pascal, brilliant scientist and mathematician, he says there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every person, and it can never be filled by any created thing. It can only be filled by God, made known through Jesus Christ. Well, that's what Jesus claims. Right? Now, here's what we want to do in the Alpha course. We want to take the next 9 weeks to ask some questions. Questions that some of us have based our lives on. Questions that maybe we haven't thought through much. Questions that are bothering us in some ways. And we want to see, what does Jesus Christ have to say to any of those questions? And he makes a giant claim. And that's a claim that you can examine as we meet together and talk through those things. And you can share your ideas about where they are. Now, I would be, if I was you, because like I said, I was not a person who was extremely devoted to religion growing up. I went to church and stuff, but I'm in this meeting and I'm just wondering, why did my friend invite me? Why did they insist that I come? Why did they nag me? Because this is about the 4th time that they asked me to come to this stinking thing. I finally came to get them to leave me alone. Why? And why is this church doing this? All right, well, we're not going to ask for any money from you. You don't have to join Amway at the end. So why do this? I think probably the same reason why somebody invited you to this. Because at some point, just like my experience, I had a category of religion that left me feeling like Christianity was boring, at least irrelevant. Even if it was true, it was irrelevant to my life. It wasn't making an impact until I picked a Bible up and began to explore God. And I did that for about 6 months. I just read the Bible for about 6 months. And I came to a realization in my heart of the reality of this God, had an encounter with God in such a way that truly redefined my whole life. And that impact has changed my insides. And if I can give that away to anybody, if I can stand in the parking lot like my friend there in Green Bay and say, hey, you want to have this encounter, game day starting now. Hey, I'm excited about the Saints season coming up here. I'm concerned, to be honest with you, but I'm excited. But I'm more excited by the impact of what God did, because I remember at one point there wasn't an impact. I remember asking questions. I remember feeling empty. I remember feeling like I'm missing something until the day came when that changed. And if I can introduce you to that day, if the person who invited you and discussions at a table can introduce you to that moment, then this is the greatest thing I can think to be doing on a Tuesday night. So here's what we do from here on. If you're interested in coming back, all we ask you to do is just let your table host know that you'd like to be here. And I get it, 10 weeks is a long time, and maybe you're thinking, I'm going to be traveling this week, I won't be able to. Hey, if you can make most of the weeks, then go ahead and let us know that you're planning on making most of the weeks, and we'll do the best we can with that, and you can do the best you can with that as well. If you have kids that are 11 years old and under, and you're wondering, what do I do with my kids on Tuesday night? Well, we've got a kids program that goes on downstairs that your kids will love. So if you want to bring them for that, you're welcome to do that. If you're here saying, I've got a cousin, sister, brother, aunt, whatever, that would probably love something like this, you're welcome to bring them back with you. I know we don't have a ton of space available, but speaking is my job, and sitting people is not my job, so I don't really care what a difficulty that is. So go ahead and invite whoever you want, bring them back with you, and we'll figure out somewhere to seat them here. But looking forward to, you made it through the first night, so all you got left is 9 weeks now. See there? Way down the road already. But great to have you guys. Look forward to seeing you again next week.